Andre, why don't you, it's 2 till, but I'm gonna put on screen about the training and everything next. But why don't you go ahead in this last minute? Not everybody here at least knows you, but just tell us your new role
Okay,
and a little bit of your background.
sure.
So,
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Andre Boyer. I am the Community Development Director with Cochoingua. I have a military background as well as an educational background. My doctorate is in education, specifically teaching English to speakers of other languages. I've done numerous of things over my career and life. So I retired from the United States Marine Corps after 22 years of service, university professor, worked overseas for many years in different positions, and I'm just happy to be here.
yeah. And I'm very excited that you're with those folks and where all that's moving and that they've gotten someone with your skill sets to help really move the community of welcome forward. And that's going to end up being our first announcement at 8 o'clock. And so welcome. It's good to see all of you at the intersection this morning. And we have a couple quick announcements, and I'm going to share screen. I sent one of them out to all of you earlier this week, and I know some of you have responded. And so thank you for that. When refugees were coming from Afghan to begin with, like, oh yeah, over a year ago, August, September, October timeframe, and we were working a collaborative of all sorts of organizations to help in that welcome and transition. We noticed that one of the gaps in our services here in San Antonio was actually being neighbors with folks who were making San Antonio their home. And so Culturingua and the Interfaith San Antonio Alliance and that whole collaborative that was working together, but came up with this community of welcome. It's the easiest way to think about it is like going, when you move to a new place, those folks that help you out and help you figure out where to get groceries and where to go to the doctor and welcome you and become your lifelong neighbors. Those folks are so important. So we didn't realize that that was like a pilot program. So that happened this past year, and it was really exciting. So I encourage people when I sent it out earlier this week to attend these information sessions. I think even on your screen, if you're interested, you could probably use your phone right now on that January 8th date. And Andre, if you could put into chat your email address, so people, if they're interested in knowing more, I'd encourage you just to go to the info session, whether your organization or your congregation has decided or hasn't even talked about it, doesn't make any difference. If you go to the info session, then at least you'll know what this is all about, right? And you can be a great ambassador for this really important work of compassion towards new San Antonians, but that companioning and walking with them. So I wanted to share that with you. The other thing I wanted to share with you, kind of as an introduction to our next, to our conversation today. So I hope you can see this on screen. Let's see, there we go. Can everybody see this? It says dreamweek.org at the beginning. Okay. So there are tons of things happening during Dream Week. And Show was here before in the fall, as well as Dwayne Normanson talking about all the MLK events. I went through them, and this is just a really quick listing of things that they all do, but that really connect to a lot of the work that we're doing here. I've only in this listing given the date and the time. So if you want to know more about any of these things, I'll also send out this list to all of us, but you need to go to dreamweek.org/events. because that's where all of that will be listed. And these are things I just don't want anyone to miss, right? So I'll let you take that in a little bit. Write those things down, note them. This one here, you can't actually go to, the January 18th through 20th. But in case you didn't know, our mayor is the chair for the Compassion Institute of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which are mayors of the 300 largest cities in the country. So he's going to be making a presentation January 18th through 20 in DC about compassion at San Antonio and where we're headed as a city and as a country. So keep him in mind, the 18th through 20th, as he represents us. So 8:04, when Show and Dwayne came the last time in the fall to tell us a little bit about what's coming, in that time together, we came up with this idea that if people just found out more about each other in story and in conversation, that in itself, one, would be an act of compassion and care for each other, but it also provides some healing, some truth speaking, some reconciliation. It would create community, like what would that look like? So today is the first of a series this month, and we're all going to be a part of it today because I have never done this, with a group of people like we're doing today. So we're all going to do it together. I hope you're okay with that because it's the only way I'm going to be strong enough to do it. So the first thing I want to do is to invite everybody, if you don't have like a piece of paper near you or something and a pen, because I want to invite everyone to be answering and thinking about these questions and what those answers would be for your life. So we're like all doing it together. I have spent, it might not sound like it, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about what questions can help us in 30 minutes get to some common ground between two different people. So you might even be thinking about the questions that I'm offering, and if those are helpful, because I'd like to hear that back. And then hopefully the next 3 sessions will become even better. So this is our kind of our pilot, if that's okay. I hope it's okay, because that's what we're going to do. So that's just what we're going to do. So Show, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good. So maybe we can get Show and myself on screen. So, again, this is kind of our safe time because Show and I are going to be the 2 people. And he hasn't had time to really think about the answers, and I really haven't thought much about mine. I've been really thinking more about what are the questions to get there. So my first question, and I can go first, Show, if you want to think about it, but my first question to everyone, if somebody by perception were to describe you just by, your daily work and that type of thing, what would they probably quickly say about you? So for example, I'm Ann, and I work for the city. I'm also, a minister. Those perceptions are really weird when I think about it, and what people carry that about me. But I'm a minister, I work for the city, and I build collaborations. That's kind of my daily work. So Show, what would you describe, what you think people would describe of you as their perception of your daily work?
Morning. I think that's a very difficult question, but I think people perceive me as a businessman and for some reason, a community person, someone who connects organizations and individuals within the community. But I run an advertising agency, and my passion, and I hope that what reflects is I just love people, just the idea itself of having individuals who have a totally different experience that I could never be have lived, and trying to figure out how my life would have been very different, or my perception of the world would have been different if I had grown up in their skin. So trying to understand how, the lottery of our birth, how we're born, the language, the culture, just the environment shapes us, and how that can maybe frame my own, or at least disturb my own stereotypes, and just make me a lot more. I'm looking for that common human being, the commonality within all of us, right?
So the one thing you mentioned, which is kind of the next question, is I called it the basics in my question, but the environment that we were both each born into. So one of the things that I've heard you say, just in that perception piece, is how we both have a connection in terms of community and humans, and that coming together. And I think that's probably the thing that you and I resonate with. And I need to tell people, Sho and I really don't know each other very well. But I think, and so I'm very excited about this conversation, but I think in those perceptions that we just talked about, we resonated there, that we could see in each other that kind of community and commitment. But now the second question you've already raised about the environment, the basics that we were born into. So Sho, I'd love to hear about, your basics. Where were you born? And, how you got here. And I'm just talking about really kind of like geography and basic culture. What was that you grew up in? Now, I hope everybody's answering all of these things for themselves. So, Sho.
So I was born in Lagos, Nigeria. It was pre-independence. So Nigeria itself had just gained its independence. And as a former British colony, everyone's ambition was to be not everyone, but the elite's ambition was to be as British as possible. And that's what sort of got you further along, the more British you were. So went to boarding school in Nigeria when I was 9, and until I was about 16. And then I was fortunate enough to go to England, and the equivalent of the high school there, which is A levels. And I went to University of Leeds, which is about 200 miles from London itself. But I always, one of my earliest recollections of, talking to my father about the civil rights itself was, I remember he laughed hysterically at this, but I told him I wanted to be a Negro, because I just loved, I just loved all the civil rights documentaries I saw when I was growing up. And so I always wanted to come to America. I thought America was, at least Black folks in America were the zenith of what it was to be human. The struggle, the persecutions and the like, but the overcoming of it. And so I ended up in New York after my father, tragically, he was shot in Nigeria. He was a chief, but a chief is very similar to being a council person here. But, council people differ in terms of the size of the city. But he was a king's spokesman, and it's kind of political. But so I kind of lost my way a little bit. I arrived in New York, and I studied civil engineering. but I wanted to be a writer. So I did one of those slum years in New York, driving a cab and I went to the School of Visual Arts, and I was trying to, just find my way. And that's when I sort of saw a little bit of the underbelly of America itself. And so for a lot of people around the world, America is what I think I imagine Christians would describe as heaven. They don't want to go anywhere else. They don't have any other prayer except to get to America. That's really what it is. And to some extent, I grew up with the Cosby Show and, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, all of those heroes. And so it was very disappointing when I ended up in Brooklyn and I saw this very difficult environment for African Americans in there. And the fact that I wasn't, even with I'd read, all the right books, I thought, but and listened to, I felt I was versed in African American culture, but I was very disappointed that that didn't hold any sway in that environment. My accent, I was off. I was 6'5" Black man living in a project and driving a cab. I was just very weird all around. So it was a struggle, and I tried. It was really, really difficult. So in all my life prior to that point, my presence and the way I spoke would get me out of certain situations, and I was just kind of privileged, really. But all of that came to nothing, and so that was very. Looking back now, that was the most. I think that was the defining point in my life where everything I had before that did not matter, and I had to find who I was. Who is this being that doesn't? That it doesn't matter where you're from. You're practically penniless. You're in New York. You just happen to be Black, and that's basically all it is. And that's where it started from. And
can you hold that for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
That spot. I have a quick question. What kind of work did your parents? What was do? What kind of work did your father do? That's a quick question.
My father was the director of a multinational company, Dunlop Tires, in Nigeria then. So he
Fascinating. It's weird. I mean, I'm listening to that, and I've only been to the airport in London. And so it's one of the places I still want to go. I've been to a lot of places on the planet, but I'm thinking now I should go to London with you.
Yes.
Because I would like to go to London with somebody who knows it, right?
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about going lately, but just one of the places I haven't gone. But our initial lives are really different. Maybe you'll hear some commonalities, right? I don't know. I grew up real Midwest, halfway between Chicago and St. Louis, on a farm near a village whose population is still 302. So very small community. The interesting thing about that area, it's the only area in the country where they still have land lease the way they do. And the land is owned by somebody in London and has been forever. And so my dad leased the land that he farmed. He got paid once a year at the last day of the year. And I don't know how he raised 6 children on that. And I didn't realize as a child that we were probably at poverty level. I didn't know that. Very happy type of thing, but very white, right? Everybody.
What does that mean?
Well, everybody looked like me, and we were a bunch of cookie cutters, actually, because everybody was living on a farm. Everybody had large families. And I remember summer camp, when I was in 7th grade, was the first time I met someone whose skin was a different shade than mine. And it was almost like I didn't know, because even TV wasn't showing that, right? It was strange. I was very fortunate, though, in high school to encounter a friend, sort of famous basketball player, Norm Cook. He played for Indiana, but he was from the town next door, and we got to be friends. And I learned a lot about the world through him. But you know, I went to the same grade school, middle school, high school that both of my parents did. And that little school is still open. Their graduating class last year was 8, and they still have full faculty for them. It's just like weird. I think about it sometimes. The entire school is like 110 people, but so really, you know, kind of sheltered in that respect.
But you acquired a very kind of a very direct knowledge of relationship between language and all around you. I mean, you lived directly from the earth.
Right. Oh yes, very much. In fact, I've always referred to my father as a dirt theologian, because a lot of a really smart guy. And I'm going to go to the next question, because you talked about a moment. That's where we kind of pinned that when you said that everything before, because that's one of the questions. Was there a moment, and there might be several of them, but was there a moment where there was a shift in your life? Like you knew it was shifting, and everything before was one thing and everything else went another direction. And you mentioned that when you were in Brooklyn. For me, it was when I was in high school. One, I grew up with parents that my father read the encyclopedia at night. And so when he would find things of interest every night, all the time, he would say things like, "Did you know?" And then he would read this whatever. And so I traveled all over the world through my father and 3 full sets of encyclopedias. So when the guy would come around with a new set, he would trade in the old and get the new and read through that, you know, a high school education, right? And my mom read the dictionary, you know, and that's what they did at night. And so I'm just way into words and etymology and everything. But what happened to me, one of my turning moments, was with the school counselor, you know, when I was a junior or senior in high school in that little bitty community. And, you know, it wasn't quite the same process that it is today about going to college. And I mean, that's a real process these days, but I went in to see her like everybody did to figure out where I was going to go to college. And I wanted to go to the University of Illinois. I'm not exactly sure why, but I just remembered that's where I wanted to go. And at the time it was like 35,000 people. And of course I was growing up on a farm next to a village of 302. And she told me, when I told her that, she told me, "Well, you can't go there." And I'm like, "What?" You know, you know, everything I'd always been taught was like, you can do anything, right? You know, find your space in the world. You can do anything. And I was like, what? What do you mean I can't go there? She said, because it's too big. It's too big. And you've grown up in this smaller space. So we're going to need to look at someplace else. Right. And I remember getting up and walking out of her office door. And I'm like, I'm going to the University of Illinois. Just watch. You know, just watch me, you know, too big. And I almost flunked out my first year. And I went to school on a full scholarship, but I almost flunked out because I had lived in a smaller space. Right. So, tell me a little bit more about that moment that turned you in Brooklyn. Say more about that. Oh,
Okay.
I hear.
Just before I jump into that though, I just want to make sure that the smallest space that you describe is something that a lot of people, I believe, at least the people I grew up with, were really striving for. It didn't happen in my circumstance, but you imagine people who have, 7 or 8 of them sharing one room, and just have a ton of people in that environment, literally no privacy. Just the idea of just being able to walk out on a farm by yourself, it's something very appealing, I think, as well. And so that idea of space is interesting that you brought up. But for me, it was just this dawn that I had spoken English. I speak my father's language, my mother's language, and Yoruba, this language that in the environment I grew up in. But English was the official language, and it just dawned on me then, sometime in Brooklyn. I can't remember the exact date, but that I really didn't understand the language. That it was something that obviously I had adopted, but because of how people like you, I thought. It was kind of very intuitive for you, but for me, I had to kind of almost each time I spoke, I would have to translate from something else. It wasn't necessarily language, but I had to be very conscious of what I was saying each time. And and then my accent, obviously, the African, British, all of that didn't really help. Right now, I have an accent everywhere I go. But so I decided that I really wanted to find God. And I just said it to myself that, okay, God, well, you put me in this position. I don't know what's going on in my life. And so I started to read the Bible from page 1, and I have something in common with your dad in that aspect. I would voraciously read the encyclopedia when I was even before I was 10. I just found it really fascinating. But I read the Bible, the entire book, and I was shocked at what I didn't realize, was some of the stories that I hadn't really heard before. And then I started to read it again, and I didn't get past, the second time I didn't get past the Garden of Eden. And that's really where my entire life changed, because I realized that I had completely, I was kind of asleep. I hadn't been conscious of the language I was using to communicate. And that's what the Bible did for me. And that was changed my life entirely. So from being kind of more happy-go-lucky and someone who I was very determined to be successful, I started to sort of work towards finding this, what I felt I had kind of lost. I felt I needed to find, I need to really align with my destiny, if that makes any sense. Your destiny is your destiny, but I wanted to be in alignment with it so I wouldn't struggle. So that's what happened. My very first big breakthrough was having left. Actually, while I was still in the School of Visual Arts, I had a lecturer then who worked for the New York Times, and I would be writing and I'll have little doodles on the side, and she was really fascinated by those doodles. And my very first job, cab driving, I did a little bit of modeling at one point, but it was as an illustrator for the New York Times. And so that was my first understanding of this idea of grace, of being given something that you don't necessarily feel is any worth, or you don't earn, sorry, put it that way. Not it's worthy, but you don't have any. And so I've been that's been the two things that I've been working on since that point, which is basically having one voice, which is trying to speak to everyone I meet in a manner that I would basically saying, well, my voice is really not for me. What I'm saying is not for me, it's really for you. That's number one. So speak directly from the heart. I hardly ever, have anything scripted. And then the second thing is really to try as much as possible to listen in a very intentional fashion to what folks are saying, and try and find, because then I realized too that if it's from their heart, they actually telling me something as well that I need to hear. But I have a
I
question.
wish we had more time, because there are like 100 different ways now that I want to, now just listening to you, I'm thinking we have so much in common, right?
Yes, for sure.
But then I look at what we've talked about before, and it's a different path, and the first time, I mean, I grew up, in Sunday school, and because it was such a small community, basically all that was there was family, school, work, and church. That's it. And it just kept repeating itself every day. That's what we had. And my parents were, janitors at church as well as teachers and leaders. And so I had those images. But the first time I read the Bible from the beginning to end wasn't until I was in seminary, and part of my seminary education was here at Oblate School of Theology, and my professor, Dr. Himbrood, was Dutch. And one of the things, though, that he was like, we're just going to read this book. Imagine the Dutch accent. I'm not good at it, but we're going to read this book from beginning to end, like you're just reading a book. And I don't know about you, but when I got to the end, I thought, they're just people like we are. They just didn't have airplanes. The intelligence, the struggles, the wisdom, the stumbling, whatever all of that in the stories were, it's just like, just like us, just didn't have airplanes or whatever those other advancements. The intellect was not, I just was amazed by that. And when I really started doing more of the work that I do, and I love that alignment that you talk about in terms of your destiny, this, how were you created? And when I really kind of came in and out into that was about 30 years ago, but with a gang peace summit. And my farmer father, came to visit, and my mom during those times. And my dad came to me and he was like, why are you doing this? Like, what are you doing? And I know, I mean, it took me a little bit to figure it out, but he was my dad, right? And he was nervous and scared. He didn't say those words, right? But he was like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, because I actually believe the things you taught me. And I intend to act on those things, for the rest of my life, that loving others is the essence of it all, right? And caring no matter what. And so, like those very basics of, like the golden rule, treating others the way we wish to be treated, seeing them for who they really are, because that's the way we wish to be seen, and not to treat people the way we don't want to be treated. I believe those things. You taught me, wasn't I was supposed to believe that, right? Or was that just something you were telling me, right? And the whole language thing that you talked about, I feel like I'm always translating, right? Although I would say in the last couple of years, my language has become more integrated, like I'm not as conscious about translating, but for a long time, and still, like, who am I talking to and what language do I need to use? And it doesn't just mean things like, well, I'm talking to healthcare folks, so, or I'm talking to teachers, or, but can we develop a common language? My dad had a question he would bring up all his life, and it's on his, I would say, tombstone, but he doesn't have a tombstone. He's got a rock. He wanted just a river rock where his ashes are. So there's just this big rock, and on it, he was just always like, why can't we just love each other? I don't understand. He struggled with that till the very end. And
I mean, what would you say the language of God is? What's God's language?
It's kind of the one that you were talking about how you don't speak from notes. You try to speak authentically, that language that is deep within us, that is of the heart and from the gut. Like when we meet people where they are, for who they are, believing that they're bringing their best self to it, and so am I. Can we talk there? That language, can we talk there? And can we talk a language that most people around us could understand? Can we not use terms that we got to totally break down and figure out between us? Can I talk to, and I've done this even raising my own children. We never used baby talk. And, I had a 3-year-old who was reading the newspaper at 3. And, can we use language because I believe that love and compassion was our first language when you ask the language of God. And we have somehow taught ourselves out of it or learned ourselves out of it, right? But
I think I know we've run out of time, but one of the reasons why I think Dream Week is very important is that ultimately that when we share our dreams, and we're also looking for this common language that we share as well, that we could ascribe to be the language of God, or express ourselves in a manner that is so clear and so direct that everyone has something to gain out of it, and no one is excluded. The language that no one is excluded. We have a joke. Growing up, we had a joke in Nigeria that said that if the white man hasn't seen it, it doesn't exist, because we always would, our elders would tell us about all these interesting animals in the forest, and that we couldn't read anywhere in any book. And so it's very important that not everything we understand and actually experience exists within the English language, for example, or any one language. And that is why we have to be very careful of ascribing one particular language to God.
right.
And that's one of the things that really came up when I was reading the Bible. For 10 years now with Dream Week, internally we've argued about the idea of the meaning of the word woman and what it actually meant. I mean, 10 years ago, we're having this, literally in San Antonio, we're having this discussion. It's something that's going to keep coming up because it's literally up for grabs, because there's never been any it's almost as if the English language is losing its religion in a sense, and it's very important that we keep those terms almost precise for everyone sharing the language, and it can be one thing for one person and another thing for another. And so what we're trying to breach now is this idea that some folks believe that language itself is set and we should not change anything about it, and another group believe that language itself, the meanings and stuff, can really be turned around. And I probably haven't articulated it as well as I should, but that's really where the divide is. Really, can you play around with language, or is language essentially a form of God, where woman came out of man, that's it, that's exactly what that is, nothing changes, and we just have to live through that through some sort of pseudo faith. And in reality, that's not what people see in their everyday lives. So we have to address what does mean, and it always comes from when you see things, when we read things literally, and kind of discard a lot of the spiritual component of it. I know we don't have as much time, but something that was very, very enlightening for me was the fact that I read the Bible in a different language, in Yoruba, a little bit of it, and all the words like Eshu is a god in Yoruba, that is a trickster god, was translated to become the devil, for example. And so I started to really question what God and the devil and all those terms meant before it was translated from the original Hebrew, or basically before it was translated into the Bible, what those terms meant as well. And that's reading Chaucer or maybe some of Shakespeare and trying to find out what this language is. So we are living in a moment now where we have to really start to listen and really be a little bit more cautious of how we speak and the terms we're using, and and not just really hide behind terms like maybe even the word idea black or white, that don't really serve us as much as well as we think they should.
So we're just gonna pause, but you and I are gonna continue this conversation another time. I feel like I could talk for hours and listen to you for hours, but at 8:41,
yes.
I'm wondering with everybody, but Sho, since you kind of raised this idea, do you think this conversational process has value? What we just did this morning?
For me, yes, completely. I think, I mean, I want to know what I don't know that you know.
And I'm also wondering what other people are thinking out there. I have to admit, have not been following chat. There's some people relating. But
thank you all for being here, and I hope that you can visit, you can come and attend at least 1 or 2 events for Dream Week. We have about 200 or so events, and hopefully too, this is not something that maybe only this year with the conversations. I think this could be a real centerpiece of Dream Week for years to come, if we can spend some time and kind of frame how we like to present it. And just, it's wonderful listening to different people and their lived experiences. We hope that Dream Week one day, maybe not in my lifetime necessarily, but we'll be able to unearth the Mandelas, the MLKs, and the Gandhis of this world. We just don't know where they come from and what background. And as long as we create an environment where voices can be heard, I think will be, it'll give us at least a great opportunity to.
You know, there was one other question I had, but I'm going to end it with what I heard from you that has just been ringing in my ears ever since I heard it last fall. So my last possible question, you know, what is your dream, you know, for the world? And one thing that you said that captured me, and I have found myself living in it, you know, was that you envisioned that one day, because of who San Antonio is and how we are, that one day people from other places would say, let's go to San Antonio and work this out. So I hope it's okay if I share in that dream that you articulated so well, because it really, it's captured me. And I think we need to speak of those visions that capture us, right? And verbalize them again. But I see the same thing, and yeah, let's go to San Antonio and work this out. I see Beverly has her hand up, and it's 8:45, so we are going to sign off. But Beverly, talk to us.
Good morning, my friend. How are you?
Beverly.
So, Sho, one of the things that has fascinated me about you, which is a part of your San Antonio story, is the fact that you came in with this wonderful, you weren't deterred by distractors when you came up with doing Dream Week. I remember being at the table with you when you sharing that vision and sharing that, and people other later grumbling, well, who is he? And you know how we do, who is he to do this? And I said, he's Sho, and aren't we so blessed to have him? That God blessed him to bring him here. You brought new ideas, fresh ideas. And now that Dream Week really now should be called Dream Month, but I just want to say,
or dream on, like dream on.
Listening with and talking with you, that you had to be a man of strong faith, because you were stepping out on faith. You were stepping out on faith to do something that was so inclusive and so diverse, that brought people normally people here would have thought to have this as just a Black community thing. But what you did is you made this a San Antonio thing. And I love that about what you did. That was pushing against the tide and being a change agent when we needed it, and seeing what it has come to, because it fits in with the things that Ann talks about in terms of compassion and heart and respecting. The most important thing it does is help us to respect each other and our differences, and also appreciate each other and our differences. So I just wanted to say thanks. I knew you were a man of faith because I saw what you did, and that had to come from somewhere. And it certainly, you needed a lot of capacity, and only God can give you that. So thanks.
By the way, Sho, that was a very Gandhian move of you. You began where you wished to end. So you started it as a whole San Antonio thing.
Well, yeah.
Gandhi
Thank
move.
you. But I have to thank Beverly for her support throughout the years. I mean, you've done so much for Dream Week to get Dream Week just on solid footing, and you just can't thank you enough. I've always said this though, and there's several people on this call as well, that if we had more people like Ann and Beverly in our environment, I just think I think the entire world would be actually a much better place. But we also have to, there are people who I believe are out there and who just don't have the access. And that's really what I honestly try to do. I'm also searching, and I think I have a few things to share, but I think we all have a little piece of it. I think there's genius within all of us. And if we look inwards long enough, I know there's a lot of noise that we have to sort of navigate through. But I thank you for Anne for your genius, and Beverly certainly for your genius as well, because it's really helped me in my own life. So again, thank you, ladies.
And thank you. I want to thank everyone for being with us this morning. If anybody has ideas about this process that we're doing, just email me. I'd love to hear that, but I do want to honor all of our time. So thank you.
Next person, we need to hear Beverly.
Beverly's on the list.
Beverly
Oh
okay,
yeah,
good,
she already said yes. She's shaking her head and she already said yes. I'll see you all next week at the intersection.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Show.
Thank you.